Chino Police Chief Kevin Menson refers to the transfer of at least 39 death row inmates from San Quentin to Chino's California Institution for Men. Part of the state's condemned inmate transfer program, moving how many inmates out of San Quentin?
Approximately 390 left after the pilot program that still remain here at San Quentin.
Being processed to lower security level facilities to participate in rehabilitation or work programs and pay restitution to victims as approved by voters in Prop 66.
Really? As if I would take that? That is blood money.
In the dark underbelly of urban America, gang violence has etched a legacy of terror and tragedy. Among the countless lives lost and communities torn apart by this relentless scourge, there are individuals whose crimes have shocked even the most hardened observers. Today, we delve into the harrowing stories of 5 gang members who have found themselves on death row. These men, each representing different facets of the brutal gang wars that have plagued cities like Los Angeles, have committed crimes so heinous that the justice system saw no other recourse but to sentence them to the ultimate punishment. From calculated executions to tragic cases of mistaken identity, these narratives expose the chilling consequences of a life consumed by gang allegiance and violence. Today, we're delving into the case of a brutal gang-related shooting that took place back in December 1982, in the heart of Los Angeles. This is the story of a violent confrontation fueled by gang rivalry, resulting in the tragic deaths of 2 young men. On the evening of December 18, 1982, a group of young men, including the victims, were playing a game of dice behind the family arcade on San Pedro Street. The area was known for its gang activity, with tensions running high between the Crips and the Bloods, 2 of LA's most notorious street gangs. Around 6 p.m., as the game was underway, shots rang out. The shooter, identified as a member of the Bloods, leaned over a wall, shouted, "Guess who? Piru," and opened fire on the group. The gunfire was deadly. Kirk Thomas was shot in the stomach and later died from his wounds, while Jimmy Lee Mayman was fatally shot in the head. 3 others were also hit, including a survivor named Craig Russell, who was left with bullet fragments in his arm. Witnesses at the scene identified the shooter as someone they had seen brandishing a gun just weeks earlier, wearing a black and white striped sweatshirt. Despite their fear, some witnesses came forward to identify the shooter in photographic and physical lineups, although one later recanted his statement in court. The police arrested the suspect the day after the shooting, finding evidence linking him to the Bloods, including a .38 caliber revolver used in. This wasn't just a random act of violence, it was a calculated attack, likely driven by gang hostility. At trial, expert testimony shed light on the intense rivalry between the Crips and the Bloods, and how these conflicts often lead to deadly outcomes. The shooter was eventually convicted of the and sentenced to death. But the story doesn't end there. Decades later, in a surprising twist, the shooter, now 61 years old, was transferred off death row under a new program allowing certain inmates to be housed at lower security levels, giving them access to job opportunities. This change came as part of a broader shift in Los Angeles County, led by District Attorney George Gascon, who has vowed to eliminate the death penalty. Since Gascon took office in December 2020, several former death row inmates have had their sentences reduced to life without the possibility of parole. Today, we're diving into the chilling and brutal crimes committed by a member of the 12th Street Sharks gang in Pomona, California. This is the terrifying story of Caballero, whose actions in late 2009 left a trail of death and horror. It all started in October 2009, when Caballero returned to Pomona from Las Vegas with a woman he met there, Jessica Garcia. What began as a consensual relationship quickly turned into a nightmare. Caballero became violent, beating Garcia, playing Russian roulette with her life, injecting her with meth against her will, and forcing her into prostitution. Garcia was terrified, trapped in a situation where escape felt impossible. But the nightmare didn't stop there. On November 5, 2009, Caballero's violent streak escalated. He had known Lorraine Miñarez for years, but when she threatened to report him to the police for a murder he was involved in, Caballero decided she had to be silenced. He confided in his cousin, David Padilla, and soon after sent a chilling text to a fellow gang member, Trejo, asking for help with fixing the situation. The plan was set in motion. Caballero, Padilla, Trejo, Garcia, and Miñarez drove to a remote area in Mount Baldy. As they walked through the chaparral, Trejo began testing the dirt with a shovel. When Miñarez realized what was happening, it was too late. Caballero, feigning casual conversation, led her further down the path. Once they found the right spot, Caballero gave Miñarez a horrific choice. How did she want to die? As Miñarez begged for her life, Caballero and Trejo took turns digging her grave. Eventually, Caballero strangled Miñarez while telling her it was for the best, but the violence continued. The very next day, Caballero's paranoia led to another murder. Convinced that his cousin, David Padilla, might turn on him, Caballero orchestrated his death. He, along with another gang member, Valenzuela, took Padilla to a freeway underpass. There, Caballero ordered Valenzuela to kill Padilla, first by strangulation and then by bludgeoning him with a rock. Padilla died from the brutal assault, his life cut short by someone he once called family. Weeks later, Caballero's fear of being caught began to grow. He was consumed by the thought that Miñarez might have told someone about the murder he committed. But by then, the damage had been done. Caballero had already unleashed a wave of terror that could not be undone. Today, we're diving into the dark and disturbing story of a gang member whose violent actions left a trail of blood across Los Angeles in 1994. This is the tale of a man who was once a feared member of the Six Deuce Brim Bloods and who now faces the consequences of his brutal crimes. In early September 1994, a gang war was raging between the Bloods and Crips in Los Angeles. On September 7th, a member of the Six Deuce Brim Bloods who approached a Cadillac parked outside a liquor store in a Crips-controlled neighborhood. Inside the car were 3 members of the Rollins 60s Crips. Without hesitation, the gang member pulled out a gun and shot all 3 men at close range, killing them instantly. The shooter, none other than the defendant in our story, who was identified by witnesses but challenged their credibility during his trial. But the violence didn't stop there. Less than a month later, on October 3rd, the same gang member targeted a security guard in Santa Monica. As the guard patrolled the parking lot of a credit union, he was ambushed and shot multiple times. The shooter and his 2 accomplices fled the scene and later carjacked a woman's vehicle nearby, leaving a trail of chaos in their wake. At trial, the defendant tried to shift the blame, claiming that one of his companions was responsible for the shootings. However, witness testimonies and forensic evidence told a different story. The prosecution revealed the defendant's violent history, including previous carjackings, and tied him directly to the 1994 and the attempt of the security guard. Now, this brings us to the present day. The man who once terrorized the streets of Los Angeles is facing the consequences of his actions. Originally sentenced to death, he's been confined to a small cell on San Quentin's infamous death row for over 20 years. Life on death row is bleak, confined to a 4 by 10 foot cell, handcuffed anytime he leaves, and locked down for 20 hours a day. But that's all about to change. With the passing of Proposition 66, California's death row is undergoing a major transformation. Inmates, like the defendant in our story, are being transferred out of San Quentin and integrated into the general prison population across the state. This move is part of a broader plan that requires death row inmates to pay restitution to their victims, meaning they need to be able to work. No longer confined to their cells, these inmates will now experience a very different life behind bars, one where they're no longer isolated and are allowed to move more freely within the prison system. We're diving deep into the chilling case of Regis Deon Thomas, a reputed gang member whose crimes left an indelible mark on Los Angeles. This is the story of how a series of brutal murders, including the execution-style killings of 2 Compton police officers, led to Thomas being sentenced to death. It all began in January 1992 when Carlos Adkins was shot and killed in the Nickerson Gardens housing project. The tragedy unfolded in the apartment of Janice Chappell, with 3 witnesses present: Andre and Janice Chappell and their friend Bertrand Dixon. An altercation between Thomas and Adkins escalated quickly, resulting in Adkins being shot during a struggle for Thomas's gun. Adkins later died from a gunshot wound, and Thomas fled the scene. Despite initial attempts to avoid capture, Thomas was eventually identified and arrested for Adkins' murder. At trial, witnesses identified him as the shooter, and he was convicted of second-degree murder. But the story doesn't end there. Just a year later, in February 1993, Thomas's crimes escalated to an even more shocking level. Late one night, Compton police officer Kevin Burrell and reserve officer James McDonald pulled over a red pickup truck on Rosecrans Avenue. What began as a routine traffic stop quickly turned deadly. Witnesses reported seeing Thomas struggling with the officers before shooting them at close range. Both officers were found lying face down, executed with multiple gunshots. As the investigation unfolded, more damning evidence came to light. Thomas's wife testified that on the night of the murders, he left home with a gun and later returned in a state of agitation. A close associate, Calvin Cooksey, revealed that Thomas had confessed to the killings, bragging that the officers had slipped and that he had executed them. Cooksey later helped authorities recover the murder weapon, linking Thomas directly to the crime. In court, the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found Thomas guilty of the first-degree murders of officers Burrell and McDonald, as well as the earlier murder of Carlos Adkins. The special circumstances of multiple murders and the killing of police officers sealed his fate. In 1995, at just 25 years old, Regis Deon Thomas was sentenced to death by Superior Court Judge Edward A. Ferns. The sentencing came after an emotional hearing where the families of the slain officers and Compton's police chief demanded justice, while Thomas and his family pleaded for mercy.
Los Angeles police say the mother, sister, and 2 nephews of former National Football League star Kermit Alexander were shot dead in their home today. Witnesses said that 2 gunmen walked in the family bungalow and opened fire. They didn't say anything, said a 13-year-old boy who escaped by hiding in a closet. He said they just came in.
The last of 3 men convicted in the 1984 of Kermit Alexander's family was formally given a death sentence today. An LA Superior Court commissioner accepted a jury's recommendation of death in the gas chamber.
Today, we're exploring the tragic and chilling case of Tiequon Lil Fee Cox, one of America's most notorious prison inmates and a key figure in a devastating crime that rocked Los Angeles. Tiequon Cox, born on December 1, 1965, became infamous for his role in a quadruple homicide on August 31, 1984. The victims? 4 innocent family members of former NFL star Kermit Alexander, 59-year-old Deborah Alexander, her daughter Deetra, age 25, and 2 young boys, Damon Bonner, age 6, and Damani Garner Alexander, age 12. Cox, along with his accomplices, mistook the home for that of a drug dealer they sought to avenge after a bad cocaine deal. But they had the right house number on the wrong block, leading to this horrific mistake. Despite his youth, Cox was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1986, a decision that reflected the severity of his involvement. Cox's violent streak didn't end with his conviction. In 1988, while on death row, he stabbed the infamous Stanley "Tookie" Williams, a crime later depicted in the film Redemption. Then, on July 18, 2000, Cox nearly escaped San Quentin prison with 2 other inmates, forcing a major security review at the facility. The stories of Anderson Hawthorne, Robert Caballero, Marcus Adams, Regis Deon Thomas, and Tiequon Lil Fee Cox serve as grim reminders of the devastating impact of gang violence on individuals and communities alike. While their paths to death row were paved with ruthless decisions and unforgivable actions, their cases also highlight the broader societal issues that foster such violence. As these men face the irreversible consequences of their crimes, their tales stand as stark warnings about the destructive power of gang culture and the heavy toll it takes on both its victims and perpetrators. In reflecting on their fates, we are reminded of the urgent need to address the root causes of gang violence and to strive for a future where such tragedies are no longer a reality.